Spoilers ahead, but they are mostly for the world of Beastars and some are vaguely related to Season 3 stuff. Otherwise, if you enjoy this video, please consider checking out some of my books, but let's get to the video for now. Gender. It's that word that ignites such an impassioned and ignorant fervor in conservative people. Mostly with regard to transgender people. Well, I will not be talking about transgender animals or something like that in this video. But I am going to be applying various gender theories to animal groups in Beastars, because I have literally nothing better to do. So, welcome to this partial retelling of parts of my very nerdy MA dissertation. You can check that thing out if you want, seeing as it's in the description of the video, but for those who instead stick around here, I'm going to be looking at non-human animals' gender and how they apply to this manga/anime. Isn't that going to be a very fun ride? Let's dive right into it here and consider the way that we think about the carnivore and herbivore groups when they are traditionally segregated from one another in fiction. A great example, probably, comes from something like Zootopia, which also has a prey/predator dynamic, but that dynamic is actually very problematic because of certain parallels that are inherently drawn between them. They are used in a somewhat allegorical fashion, and this leads to them being indicative of a kind of black and white racial dichotomy that breaks down very quickly. For instance, in Zootopia, or Zootropolis as it was called in my territory, the predators were, at one point in time, more feral, vicious, and dangerous than prey ever were. So, having them be a kind of stand-in for black people is, wrong? Is probably the tamest term to use. This is why pure allegory, when used with animals, can be a bit dangerous. Beastars, on the other hand, complicates this dynamic. There may be certain parallels between the herbivores/carnivores and white people/people of color respectively, but that would be an oversimplification. Firstly, because animals in this fictional world are also separated into species that are all shown to have very distinct characteristics that relate specifically to that species, but also because there are too many exceptions to allow for this to be purely allegorical. The major point being that there are biological aspects that separate different species from one another and separate the major racial categories of herbivore and carnivore. So, it's more complicated than a basic allegory. This depiction is different to how they're trying to portray these groups in something like Zootopia. That's probably also because Beastars is aiming for an older audience. This allows it to explore some ideas and themes that may be harder to explore in something that is meant to be kid-friendly. But what differentiates the different racial categories in Beastars from one another? Well, carnivores are typically portrayed as stronger, larger, more aggressive, dominant, and fundamentally attracted to meat. Meat, of course, in this world, would be other people rather than being non-human animals that we can mentally distance ourselves from. Herbivores, on the other hand, are seen as weaker, smaller, more timid, and submissive. In very simple terms, we can see that carnivores are portrayed as what we have come to associate with masculinity, while herbivores are more feminine-coded. Let's have a look at a few characters that might be able to show this. We have a character like Bill the tiger, and he is shown to be strong, assertive, aggressive, and embraces that carnivore part of himself that wants to eat meat. He strives to be a real carnivore, which comes across in a similar way to those immensely sad people who talk about what it means to be a real man. Who else though? Well, there's every single member of the Shishigumi, which is a gang of lions. They are dangerous, aggressive, dominant, and all those other signifiers we associate with masculinity. Okay, but you may say that I'm only talking about male carnivores, so of course they're going to act masculine. Well, there's also Juno. Sure, she will have certain attributes that are associated with femininity, but she is also fiercely competitive, quick to anger, and willing to threaten harm when she believes it will benefit her. Womanhood and femininity are not one and the same. She sees herself as a proud woman, but she's still masculine in how she responds to the world. What about herbivores then? See, here's where we encounter a bit of a problem. There are not that many main characters who are herbivores in comparison to the carnivore ones, or at least not that many who are given as much attention as the carnivores. This is pretty much because Legacy is the primary protagonist, and he is a wolf, and so he, obviously, hangs out with other carnivores most of the time. Herbivores like Haru or Cosmo may be sexually open-minded, which is often taken as a masculine attribute, but they are also submissive and expect to be harmed by carnivores, and they even often come to embrace it in a passive and problematic way. Other herbivores are generally there at the mercy of carnivores like Seven. She is shown to be immensely submissive with the carnivores around her, and she will simply allow herself, although that word choice is problematic in and of itself, to be pushed around. She even only starts to gain respect from other carnivores when they think that she has a carnivore boyfriend. Now that would probably come off as rather familiar to women who may be watching this, as many men are just assholes, but as soon as they think you are taken, they are more likely to leave you alone. So, we can see that the masculine-coded carnivores act like your stereotypical masculine human males. There are also characters like Pina, who is quite queer-coded despite being a playboy. However, his particular brand of this is in line with more feminine depictions. He has soft features, he is soft-spoken, and when he is confronted with genuine danger, his entire confident facade falls away and reveals the more timid reality underneath. Each of these characters can have moments in which they defy this binary of masculine and feminine, but that is simply in keeping with reality. In the real world, the ideas of masculinity and femininity are invented concepts that we attempt to apply to other people whole cloth. For instance, there are definitely moments when someone like Haru can act in a more masculine way, such as refusing to go quietly, or even someone like Bill can be more feminine, such as his moment of caring for a small chick until it has grown. This is why gender, or at least gender coding, can be seen as quite integral to Beastars as a whole. And if you were writing a story in which these elements come to be seen as biological, would you maybe not write protagonists who in some way go against all of that? This is where we get Legacy and Louis, two characters who defy the norms of their society. When we first encounter them, we can see them as being opposites of what they are supposed to be. Legacy is timid and passive, quite unlike a carnivore. Louis is assertive and dominant, quite unlike a herbivore. However, as the narrative progresses, they seem to each become more of the opposite of this. Legacy embraces the masculinity of carnivores, but tempers it with his earlier femininity. The same can be said of Louis, although we do just see more of Legacy in the narrative as a whole. Legacy remains a character who is reserved, but can allow himself to become immensely active and dominant. Louis remains a character who is firm and strong, but he has allowed himself to see that embracing a more feminine and herbivore side of himself does not equal weakness. He had always equated his herbivore status with weakness, but he realizes the opposite as the narrative continues. Sadly, a narrative can only cover so much, and we do not see as much herbivore or feminine aspects as we do carnivore and masculine. This becomes even more prevalent as Beastars continues. The narrative starts in a more unique capacity and ends up embracing a very shonen attitude, especially in the second half of the manga. This, to me at least, is disappointing, as I feel that more could have been explored rather than the hybrid stuff that is just not great. Although, hybrid characters do throw a bit of a wrench in the work, seeing as figures like Melon are technically herbivore-carnivore hybrids, but he's also really just a carnivore with some mental issues. The hybrid aspect of the narrative could have been explored in far more depth, but it isn't, and instead becomes something confused. For instance, it is suggested that Melon is psychopathic because of his hybrid status. But the same is not true of Legacy or his mother, and his mother was a first-generation hybrid, so wouldn't she also have some of these negative traits? That's not really here or now, and is something I could probably rant about for a good while, and I do in my dissertation, but I will leave it alone here, even though hybrids had the opportunity to serve as a good means of undermining some of the dynamics at play in this otherwise very interesting world. However, the world is very interesting and also non-allegorical. There may be some elements that may be seen as allegorical in some sense, but these elements have too many caveats to be entirely allegorical as a whole. We cannot say that carnivores are definitely a metaphor for people of color and that herbivores are for white people, because there are too many things that go against that simplistic reading, which is why it is such a great world to analyze. The real world is not a binary place. We may sometimes wish to pretend that that is the case, but it simply isn't. So why would the world of Beastars be a purely binary one? there may be feminine and masculine attributes, but the narrative loves to undermine that supposed binary. And that is a fantastic thing. I just wish the narrative stuck the landing, but oh well, you can't have everything you want. And that's my little retelling of things from my dissertation. If you want to read it in far more academic language, and with a lot more quotes and such to back it up, you can have a look at my dissertation. Otherwise, you can subscribe, like, whatever the hell else. Also, read some of my books. For this one, I'll say to check out Fleshstone Blues, because it also technically has furries in it, and I was just talking about gender and race and all that, and Fleshstone Blues also fiddles with such concepts. Check it out in the description, and you can even download it for free if you grab on itch. So fare thee well, and I hope that you have a great day/week/month ahead.